Welcome to Las Doctoras podcast, featuring your favorite profas bringing women and gender studies topics out of the university and onto the kitchen table.
I'm Christina, Chicana, Pinay, queer, Sha, ella, traveler, Earth, Mama Bruja.
I'm Renee, Mexicana, Tejana, Chicana, she, her, ella, Mama Bruja scholar and scribe.
Together, we are the academic and word brujas creating revolutionary spaces outside the walls of the ivory tower to cast spells, read the ancient texts, and tell our sacred stories. We make this magic as an offering to our ancestors, to those who will come after us, and for the change we wish to see in the world. Salud!
All right. Hello.
Welcome everyone who is listening today.
Las Doctoras podcast. And we're really excited again to be bringing another amazing guest.
Yeah.
This has been a guest-filled season that has just been so abundant and so beautiful. So
you put out that call, Renee. You did it.
I know. I was like, who wants to be on the podcast?
It was so amazing. Just it's
the
like,
response.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because I think, podcasting can be. We don't get much exchange of energy. We put it out there into the world unless someone comments or, reaches out to us.
Yeah.
So this has felt actually so affirming in this other new way. It's not like, so Mayana, it's so wonderful to have you here.
We're so excited to have you here. So tell us, tell our listeners, tell us who you are. Again, name, pronouns, your ancestors, your astrology, and what is your magic?
Yes. Well, thank you both. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today and sharing space with you both. My name is Mayana Geathers. My pronouns are she, her. My ancestors, I'm of mixed ancestry, as a lot of us are, with many of my, I guess kind of most split down the middle is half coming from nations in Africa and the other half coming from Europe. But I did do that ancestry.com. And so we learned that I have indigenous, I have ancestors from India. So just kind of expanding, it's amazing to see and so meaningful, especially because on my white side, I'm less surprised by where my ancestors come because I have that history. I have the people to be able to tell me, our people come from this area or this area. Like the former Yugoslavia or England or Scotland, versus on my Black side where we were robbed of that history. And so interesting to be able to kind of actually see where some of my African ancestry comes from in the nations, and that they come from, and receiving that through this DNA, even though knowing that and constantly trying to find the path of connection and honoring of all my ancestors, while honoring that severe oppression that robbed us so much of our basic identity. So that's me. My astrology, I'm a Sagittarius, born in December. I'm getting into it a little bit more, so I can never remember my
Sorry. That's okay.
But I have a app that tells me every time I need to look it up. So, but I'm hearing so much more about
the Sag tells us a lot. I'm like, oh yeah,
totally.
Yes.
Definitely a fire sign for sure. So, and my magic, my medicine, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I identify as a feminist therapist. I'm also a writer. I'm a creator of original guided meditations. I do consulting, I do training, and I am also the co-owner of a feminist therapy group practice, Bridges to Healing, that's located in Long Beach.
I love it. I'm like, there's so many things that you do. And we did
resonate.
We did publish you in Saint Lunita, which and I think there was the audio, right, of the guided meditation there. And then of course all the content that you put out on IG is always so it's like it's sometimes when you're scrolling and it's that little like, oh, I really needed to hear this.
Yes, yes.
And then
I got you on my Spotify. I play I definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And it's that I love that that perspective, you know, and kind of, you know, this will kind of lead us into what we're going to talk about, but it's that feminist lens, you know, you're like giving like that context, which I often feel like when I listen to other people, I'm like, ooh, there's like a missing part, or even if it's there and they're not saying it explicitly, then I'm not sure how to, you know, how that fits within my understanding. So I love that you give that context. So something that we wanted to talk to you about, and you know, again, Christine and I in our own spaces and different interactions that we've had, and we're always like sometimes being in spaces and maybe feeling like what, like why are we not in alignment, right? What is happening here? That is,
I'm like, we're coming from nonviolence, we're trying hard, we're integrating these lessons, and we're trying to understand this person might be coming from their own space, and
and we see the well intentions and we're like, but what is it? And then we're like, oh, it's trauma informed, right? Or a lack of being trauma informed. And so I think that's been coming up a lot for us lately when we're trying
this year
and like trying to digest certain social interactions, and because we're always leading from a place of empathy, right, rather than being dismissive or rather than being defensive, we're like, what, like, how do you know? And so again, it always comes back to like this, oh, and then also us, like, are we being trauma informed in this in this scenario? Like,
I think Renee is a Cancer and the Pisces too. You really do try to. You give a little bit more than I do as a Virgo. Let's just say
it. I mean, and it's hard. It's hard because it is my innate, but it's also like it's like kind of hard when I just want to be petty. But that being said, we would love to hear from you about like, again, and because people talk about trauma informed, but it's like, what does that actually mean? And in your case, what does that actually mean in regards to like, your magic and your medicine and therapy and all of that?
I love this whole magic medicine thing. Good call.
It is. I love it too. Thank you. Yes. I mean, this is something that we really want to be able to break down and understand. And I'm a big proponent of let's define things. Let's get on the same page for things so that we are coming to a place of mutual understanding and collective understanding so we can move forward from there. So trauma informed is it's a hot word right now. So
it's true.
We do want to understand. And so I think that the basis comes from the fact that, one, trauma exists, and a lot of people have experienced some type of trauma at some point in their life. And I can get into this more, but when we have experienced trauma, there is a set of things that we then experience or put out kind of. I don't want to necessarily just use clinical language like symptoms, but there is a range of ways our behaviors, our feelings,
coping mechanisms,
yes, that exist because of the trauma that we've experienced. And so I would say the first thing about trauma informed is that we're honoring that this is people, and this is how they're coming into all of their spaces, whether it's therapy or coming to get their teeth done at a dentist, or, you know, even walking into a library, that they're showing up in their most authentic selves, and they're showing up with what they've experienced, and all of these experiences are coming through. And so when we hold a trauma-informed lens, we're honoring that this could be the experience of somebody. And I would say that's maybe our foundation. And then as we go up, then we're starting to think about, then how do I create safety? How do I create validation? How do I create respect? How do I create collaboration in honoring that this may be coming up, right? And there's a lot of empowerment, because even if we think about trauma is disempowering. And so when we're going to heal from it, when we're going to honor the spaces, we really want to hold space for the empowerment piece. So in therapy, one, that looks like talking about it, creating space, honoring the fact that trauma may have happened, not shying away from it, not disregarding it. And I know that may sound really like kind of like obvious for therapy. Like, oh yeah, you talk about trauma in therapy. The amount of people who have been dismissed, the amount of people whose therapists have just brushed over what their trauma is, experienced or moved on or blamed. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. It is. And I've heard the stories, right? So that we're honoring that this has happened, and we're pausing, we're hitting the pause button and go, okay. And let's see what goes on, and how do we tell your story? And one of the things I always tell my clients is, I'm not going to rush you into telling your story. We know talking about your story is important. And we know that when we do, a lot of times we're able to release the shame or the secrecy that is associated with it. But if I come in and tell you when to do it, I'm just furthering disempowering you.
Yeah.
And so we're really looking to empower and to support that, and to support all the other measures, creating that safety, creating that validation, creating that understanding, and then creating that collaboration to really come from that trauma-informed lens.
I just want to say we're both taking notes. So if you see our head down, it's we're like, okay, trauma-informed lens,
I love
empowerment, forever the student, right? We're forever
no, it's good.
Like,
it's good.
Taking notes. But I think that is such an important, the way you frame it so like concisely and clearly, I think is really important. And I mean, you said it. Number one, trauma exists. I mean, sometimes that's already a huge like step.
Because the assumption is that it's not normal. Like normalcy is like that we live our lives without trauma or something. That's like, but in truth, like we all have experienced some form of
or that just because, I mean, it has me thinking of like some of the work that Leslie does, right, with Latinx parenting, when they talk about, oh, well, I was hit as a kid and I'm fine, and we're like, but are you really, right? And so when you normalize, instead of saying that was traumatic, they say, oh, that is just culture, right? Again, it's kind of gaslighting the notion that is trauma. So that's why I said, when you say number one is like trauma exists, sometimes that's that's a lot for people to say, yes, this was traumatic. Yes, this is a trauma experience. This was an experience of trauma. Even when, I have students that are hesitant to name moments of racism or moments of and not like, or because what would that mean, right? If they have to admit to experiencing that. And so, just to say it exists. And then the idea of empowerment. Because I think the other thing that I tend to hear is this notion that if we name trauma, that we're victimizing ourselves, right? That we're saying, oh, well, I'm like, well, we kind of are, right? But that somehow this is a negative thing, right? Or that we want to stay in this victim mode. But I've always said the same thing. Like, it's not about, staying in victim mode. It's about like knowing what we're dealing with and having the tools to say, oh, why am I reacting to situations in this way? Because I've got trauma. And so then I can empower myself to know that and like interrogate that. Okay, like, why am I reacting like this? And then how can I do it differently?
It goes hand in hand with people of color assuming that therapy is a white thing, or something that's not,
Yeah. So there's two things that I love that both of you said. One, I think is we can somehow ourselves up with saying, I make sense because I make sense in the context of what I have experienced. And don't normalize these experiences, or versus we also have experienced a lot of trauma that has been normalized. And so we don't understand sometimes why we're having the feelings or the sensations that we're having, because that's just normal, right? Well, that's how people speak to each other. That's how people treat each other. These types of things, like if you think about like intergenerational abuse or trauma, that you see this a lot, especially with like sexual violence. When the youngest generation discloses, it's like, well, that happened to me, and that happened to your grandmother, and that happened to the great grandmother, and that's just what happens to women. And then this what happens versus, no, this is very traumatic and this is not okay. And yes, it happened. Yes, there's a pattern here, but that doesn't mean that we're not having these very real actions and responses to that can sometimes be, and most often are, very difficult to respond to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that again, all of this is like, it's so helpful. It's context that is so helpful for us, again, when we go into certain situations. So I think a particular situation, I'm going to say I've encountered and that I've been able to kind of name that like lack of being trauma informed is, I'm like, how do I name it without naming it? Just, I will say, so my son being,
yes,
for a couple
I was
years,
like, where
he had a white teacher, a white woman teacher, and there was, and my son, who's an Aries, he's a fire, and he is fire. Okay. This is my little one. And so there's just, so of course behavior things started to show up, and so there was calls home all the time, and there was him being sent home all the time. And I was just enormously, I feel like I was triggered for just 2 years straight. Like it was like, and it took me a while to be like, what is going on? Because I can't control a lot of things, but I was like, why am I being so triggered by this? Why is this every single time it happens? It's like the world is ending for me. And then I was like, I realized, right, that I grew up in not just a community and a family, but also a school environment where any little behavior was treated as if you are a bad kid.
Yeah.
And your behavior needs to change. And this is a sign of moral character, right? Rather than just like, this is normal child development things that happen, right? And it's our job to guide them. But it was like, oh, you're a bad kid because you are misbehaving. And then there was only so many chances, especially, right? For Black or brown kids, there's only so many chances, if at all, that you're going to get before you are completely that's it. They're giving up on you. And so I think when I realized that that's what was triggering me into these like reactions, then I was able to be like, okay, like I had to remind myself, okay, I'm safe. It's going to be okay. And I had to then turn around and say to them, I need you to understand that this is what's happening. Every time you're calling me, every time you're bringing me this information, it is triggering me because of my own personal background. And I don't expect them to, like, it's my therapy I need to work through, but I at least need you to be aware of that. So then you're sensitive to how you're communicating these things to me, right? You're sensitive to being empathetic to that situation, right? Because if I got in trouble at school and there was a call home, it was going to be handled a very certain way at home.
Right.
And so I almost feel like I'm getting in trouble when my son's getting, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm being called to the principal's office. And so I just was like, but had I not I think, been able to do that work, one, I wouldn't have been able to work through my own things or advocate to the school for what I needed and what my son needed, right? I needed them. And so again, when I think Christina was like, oh, lack of being trauma informed, I'm like, fuck, that was it. That's it. They're not trauma informed. That, you know, macro, like communities of color at the macro level have experienced these traumas. And then this is how it manifests itself in the micro aggressions, right, of the everyday. So that's a way in which I felt has seen that transition from like being able to name it and then feel empowered to move through it, you know, and I'm still working through that. But
I just feel like that example is just wrought with so many different nuances, really. But I think the cultural perspective, the non-decolonial perspective, you know, like there's so many different pieces there. The non-abled, you know, like a able-bodied perspective that teacher came from too. There was just so many pieces. So I just feel for you in that, and I still feel for you, and I just think you have advocated so much in those spaces, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example, and I'm sorry that that's an ongoing situation, and I'm sure that this is going to just actually be an ongoing situation because our educational system is so based in colonial and capitalistic frameworks and white supremacy and these ideas of expecting children to behave in ways that are just completely developmentally inappropriate. This is just not how children behave, and culturally just misunderstanding and not understanding where different children are coming from, and then just their own temperaments that they come in with, you know,
personality,
their personalities that they come in, but there's so much there. But I think, you know, this is, as a feminist therapist, I believe that our intersecting identities are a huge part of our healing and our mental health, and that is because we're consistently faced with these systems of oppression, and so we are always navigating that based on our identities, on our ethnic backgrounds, on our gender, on our socioeconomic status. And so these are things that are consistently playing into how we are received. And if we don't understand that, or if we don't connect that to our mental health and how we are feeling, then we are missing a huge piece of our ability to heal, and also just to be seen, because so much of our healing is to be able to be seen and to be validated. Yes, you make sense. Yes, it's okay that you feel this way. Yes, that really happens. And for a lot of BIPOC people, you mentioned the students sometimes not wanting to name certain situations. It's because we feel it in our gut. We understand it in our intuition. You have this person treating you off, and you're like, I know it's because I'm a person of color. I know this. I feel it, even though they didn't directly say that to me. But when going to try and justify that in another scenario, you can be gaslit, you can be questioned. Maybe they were just having a bad day. And so again, you're experiencing this consistent being placed, unseen, and not validated. So we really want to hold space for these intersecting identities and the ongoing grief that comes, right? And the ways that it taps into our own space. So as you're feeling that you had very particular reactions from your parents, but now your child is going through that, and that's kicking own stuff. And then also kicking up that protective factor for our children, that we want to just be able to protect them and shield them from these horrors, these oppressions, these dynamics. And sometimes we're not able to, not sometimes, we're just not able to. And so there's so much grief and anger and sadness that also goes into that as well.
I was just thinking about all the energy that, you know, it takes to have that self-reflective like conversation with yourself, you know, in situations like this, you know, and how much how much energy we've given throughout our life as children, you know, in school, with, you know, teachers, like, and then in all these spaces to say, like, is it me? is it me? Is it me? It's me.
Mm.
It's, you know, is it? No, it's this. It's this. You know, like just and how refreshing it is to be a part of spaces where you are just believed, you are just understood. And I think I have a certain expectation that in BIPOC spaces in particular, like I will experience that. So like I only go to like femmes of color in my therapy practice. There's no one else. I'm not gonna. So, and even in those spaces though, right, we've encountered a non-trauma informed place. I think that's maybe like one of the key pieces to, you know, some challenges these last year for us. I was just in therapy yesterday, actually, and I was talking about how hard it was for me to be. I've been in different hospital situations lately. I know there's a lot we have to catch up on, and blah, blah, blah. And my counselor was like, "Are those pretty like, you know, male and white spaces?" And I was like, oh yeah, they are. And just kind of like being able to say like, oh, there's a lot of energy that I have to bring to give to those spaces, and how tiring that has been. And actually making that a part of my grief kind of work. And then recognizing that, you know, the one woman of color, my physical therapist, you know, gave me a hug the other day, like talked to me like a real human being. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like, so recognizing that and wanting to hope and believe and speak into BIPOC spaces, more of that intersectional approach, more of that trauma informed approach.
Things that, I mean, I've been like underlining a bunch of times. This is something that we've come back to a lot, the consistency of trauma, right? Because we can say like, oh, we're healing, but then trauma is going to happen again. Right? So it's kind of like, how do you heal while continuously experiencing that trauma? And again, that's just important to name, right? That it's like, yeah, it's in a world that is kind of built on trauma, right? You are going to be experiencing that consistently. And I think the other things that has been coming up for us a lot, Christina, is grief, right? That, and I like how you say, we don't want them to experience trauma, and then accepting that they are can be really hard. Because I remember thinking, I'm going to do it differently than my parents. I'm not going to do what they did. And then there I was faced with a challenging moment. And I was like, oh, it's not that easy. It's not as easy as just saying, I'm not going to do it, because that trauma is so deep, right? That it's your default.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, oh, not only is it not that easy, but the hardest part for me has been to accept and say, like, they will experience trauma, and maybe even at the hands of me, right? Like I might be that person, and or I might not be able to protect them from that trauma as much as I would like to. And so it's like you have to kind of accept that, again, that it's going to be this consistent ongoing thing. And so then I always say, okay, if I can't prevent them from experiencing trauma, the least I can do is give them and offer them the tools and the resources to be able to work through that in a way that I was never given, right? They didn't even name it as trauma. They're like, oh, you know, my mom would say like, that didn't happen. I'm like, it did. So for me to be like, yes, I'm sorry this happened, and here's what we can do. And I think the last thing that you were saying was the big thing is you make sense. I make sense. That's more than just saying this happened to you. Like, and let's, it's like this happened to you. And of course, that's why you're the way you are. I think we do that for each other a lot of times, Christina.
You do it for me a lot. I mean, I grew up with some real weird
where she'll
stuff,
be like,
and Renee's like,
she'll say something, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course of course you're feeling that way because you grew up in this crazy ass community that told you everything you feel is wrong. And when you're able to put that into context, it's like, oh, okay, yeah.
It's refreshing.
It makes sense. And I make sense. I love that. I'm like, I make sense. Yes. And you make sense. You know, our very being, it's not just like what you're feeling makes sense. It's our very being of that is what makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yes. And one of the ways that I would kind of think about that trauma, as you were talking about, like the ongoing nature of it, is that in healing, we call that ultimately trying to integrate it into our lives so that we don't feel defined by it. So we cannot change what has happened to us, and we cannot change what will happen to us, especially those things that are out of our control. But how do we live a life where we are not defined by it? And the challenge is that when we are still healing from it, that sometimes it does very much feel like it defines us. And so that's part of the healing practice, is to be able to go in and move it into a place where we're kind of integrating it like this with, you know, together versus, you know, this is my entire identity. And the reason it becomes our entire identity is because the responses are a lot, right? It gets into kind of every part of our body, into our nervous system, into our physiological pieces of us, into our minds, into our spirit. And so when we are healing, we have to tap into each of these pieces and to hold space. And again, validate. That's one of my favorite words. Like, we just have to validate. Because so often, even when we've experienced trauma, we're not even able to validate ourselves. Oh, it wasn't bad. Oh, it's okay. You're just being stupid that you're thinking this way. Come on, get it together. Don't tell this person that you're having a reaction to this, because we don't live in a trauma-informed society. So we don't actually have a mainstream language to talk about the things that have happened to us. And we are ready to just judge, and we are ready to just kind of say, oh, you're being quote unquote crazy.
Or sensitive, or
oh yeah, that's a big one. Oh, you're just being overly sensitive to these pieces. And we're seeing it right now. We're seeing it a lot in the way that the laws are being written, and we're seeing it in even our discussion around, like, say, gun violence. We just keep coming back to mental health, which really is a pivot from the fact that we have some very serious societal issues that we are refusing to talk about by putting it under the umbrella of mental health. We all have mental health. We all have nobody's getting away from mental health. We all have it, and it is also very important that we tend to it. So if we just put things under that umbrella, it becomes kind of like the scapegoat of, rather than talking about toxic masculinity, colonial white supremacy, patriarchy. We're not talking about these things, just nonsensical gun laws. We're just not talking about these things because we're going to put them into these other categories, which, because we don't have a mainstream language to talk about it, because we don't talk about mental health, it's very easy to do so.
Yeah. I'm like, let's get into gun violence.
Well, okay, can I ask? Well, I mean, we can talk about. I want to talk about it, but actually, I want to create enough space to talk about this integration. Like, I'm like, I want this. We want this,
I was like, how do I do that?
Exactly. I was like, can you break that down? Can we have a specific example of what that looks like? Because, if that's okay.
Let's do that. Yeah.
So one of the ways that I talk about it in my practice is I always come to this space of talking about us trying to reach our most empowered self. And what does that mean? And so our most empowered self isn't always feeling good all the time. That's not a realistic experience of life. What our most empowered self is knowing ourselves well enough and being able to validate that we all have the spectrum of emotions, and we all have reasonable responses to the things that happen in our life, and that we are worthy of tending to them, no matter what it be, whether it is excitement or whether it is anger, that is worthy of being tended to. And so when we can start to think of ourselves, I think, in this empowered way, we are ultimately integrating our experiences into our life, because we're not judging them. We're not judging ourselves. We're not holding shame anymore about what we've experienced. We've also allowed ourselves to process them to the sense that they're not necessarily sitting with us in our brain or in our body all the time, because that's what happens with trauma. It just sits there and it just vibrates constantly. And so until we have the means to release that, then it's just going to continue to vibrate. That's why I really dislike that term, time heals all wounds, because it's not time. And that makes a lot of, especially child survivors of trauma, feel like there's something wrong with them when they're still struggling with it when they get into adulthood. It's because time doesn't do anything by itself. It's the work, it's the intention over time that is what helps us heal. So we're creating these spaces for ourselves to validate and to release and to understand. And there's lots of ways that can we do this. Obviously, I'm a really big proponent of therapy. So that's one space. But we also need to do things that connect to our body. We need to be able to get in. So that actually can look like breath work, that can look like meditation, that can look like exercise, that can look like yoga, that can look like dance. It can look like things that help us tap in to our body so that we are feeling that, because we hold so much in our body. And especially if we were younger and we didn't have the language, especially when we're really babies, but if trauma has occurred before you had language, then it is just stored in your body. And ever notice, like if you've ever hit like an anniversary of someone passing or an anniversary of one of your traumas, and even if you weren't cognitively aware of it, your body just feels run down, it's because your body remembers. Your body is whole, right? And so we want to constantly work with bringing and integrating our body sensations to feel our feelings, to do the crying, to do the emoting that we need so that we can release it to the point that it is no longer vibrating constantly for us.
I'm like, there's so much. Oh, okay. I love the not judging the emotion, right? Integration is being able to get to the point of, or that this is what I'm hearing. Integration is being able to get to the point of not judging the feelings we're having, right? Saying we're going to feel angry. We're going to feel frustrated. Like we're going to feel these things and not to.
And those are a reasonable response.
Those are reasonable responses.
Yes.
And that it's part of the human experience, right? That there's not something wrong with us that we're feeling a certain way. Yeah, I think I was definitely called sensitive, and I've been trying to like reclaim that. I'm like, yes, I am sensitive, and you should be sensitive to me instead of me having to squash my sensitivity. It's like, no, then just don't say that kind of shit to me if you know I'm sensitive, right? But just to not judge that. Interestingly enough, I just posted this video because I was having some frustrating moments with my kids earlier today. And normally I would go into like, oh my God, what's wrong with us? Why are we having this frustrating moment? And, what do I need to do to prevent, these frustrating moments? As I was trying to tell my son, like, challenge is a part of life and that's how you learn. So I'm like telling him something that I'm having a hard time integrating in myself. And so and I was really like, you're doing both of this work. You're like trying to teach them shit, but also trying to teach yourself and like convince yourself of this. And so after I was driving home, I had to remind myself like very consciously, like, this is a normal part of his childhood, right? He is frustrated, not because of anything you did wrong, not because of anything that's wrong with him. This is what childhood and parenting looks like, is you're going to face challenges. And again, normally I would want to judge myself for having that challenge and saying, okay, this is just normal. This is what it is. This is what we signed up for. This is what we got to do.
So is this a good example of integration? This is what I want to know.
Yes. So what I would take is say, but it's hard, right? So I would add that validation piece, because you're having an emotional response. So, and this is like very much what happens a lot in parenting in particular, is that you can say, this child is pushing limits so that they know where they are. And this is a normal, developmental, appropriate response to this age. I can intellectually get that. And wow, it's hard. And I'm triggered and I'm angry and I need to take a break. And if we don't do that piece, then we get to a place where we have a harder time showing up for our kids because we're not validating our experience in this. And so if we can say to ourselves, it's okay. And, oh, you know, I might need a break, or I need to take some deep breaths before I respond, or I'm going to have to revisit this conversation at another point, or I'm going to have this conversation and then I'm going to go in and have a good cry or whatever to take care of myself. And I think that's something that happens a lot with parents, is that we don't honor our own experience. It's almost like we have to just keep sacrificing ourselves for our children, or to show up differently, that we don't ever go in and validate, like, that was really hard. And I really struggled with that. And I'm sad that I have to keep repeating myself, even though I know it's, you know, quote unquote normal. I'm sad that I'm angry. I'm exhausted that I have to keep repeating this thing, and giving ourselves that space. And then from that place, we can then take care of ourselves. So the thing that I always say is, if we do not validate ourselves, we will not tend to the feeling. If we dismiss it, if we tell ourselves it's stupid, we will immediately stop tending to it. If you do, and if you think about that in any ways, anything that you don't think is important, anything that you don't think is worth your time, you won't tend to, right? And so we have to validate what we're experiencing in order to have any type of response that is empathetic and loving and supportive and healing for ourselves.
So important. I mean, I'm just really thinking about the family story, that this was a waste of time, you know, like, and so I can step into this space where I'm like, oh, we shouldn't be having this issue. We're having this issue because of something that I did, or something, and that, so now we have to do this, but really we shouldn't have to be going through this, you know, like, this is a waste of time. Like, I don't know if that resonates, you know, but, and so I love this validating, like, this is actually like what real, you know, healthy recovery, parenting, you know, looks like. Time to say, like, repeating. Maybe it's the repeating in particular. My Virgo efficiency is like, I just said that, Bob. Do you remember me saying that a minute ago? You know, like,
like, how many times did I ask you to put on your shoes so we could look back? Like,
we
reached 10.
Yes, different shoes.
Yeah, you're like, I always think, like, okay, is there a different way I can communicate this? What do I need to do?
I gotta get closer. I just gotta get closer. That's
what I'm always like. I'm always like going right into their
closer.
face. I'm like, hey, you see me? Are you registering? Like, let's, you know, or let's, you know, but I also think something, Christina, that we always do, because obviously as academics, we are the queen of intellectualizing, right? So we're like, yes, we get it up here, but then that validation piece is what's like, so we can say, we can know all the things, but until we're validating our feelings, it becomes hard to integrate, right? Because we're saying, oh, I know this is going to be traumatic, right? I know all these things, but then we're not giving ourselves the space. Yeah, despite knowing all that, it
to
still
cry.
Sucks. It's still hard. It's
self-regulate. Take a shower.
It's still like I still need a break, right? Knowing all of the things, and you know, it's still it's not as simple as just turning around and, okay, now I'm good, you know, because I know all the things. It's like, no, I'm still going to feel, like you said, frustrated, or like and it's there's definitely the, like, everyday repeating, like, oh my god, I have to tell you 50 times, and then there's the, like, didn't we talk about this last week? Didn't we have this very in-depth conversation about responsibility, and you know, and now we're coming back to the same thing, right? Or the same type of behavior. Didn't you just have a breakdown about this? Didn't you? And when you have to like, and so, yeah, it's frustrating. And to name that for ourselves.
I feel like what's beautiful about this is when I'm coming from a place of like sacred confidence, we're normal, you're normal, whatever, and I hear you, I believe you, I'm kind of like, I can be more curious and be like, we did go over that and you're bringing it up again, you know, like this must be normal, like, and what I experienced in my childhood wasn't. So then I can like kind of deep in this more self-reflective thing, which leads into grief and needing to actually validate. And I mean, it's like one of these little things, like you choose this path and it takes you to grief. You choose this path and it takes you to grief too.
yeah, they all lead back to grief.
It all leads back to grief. I mean, I always say, you know, children are the most triggering creatures that you will ever experience in your life, because they literally, every stage that they go through are reminding you of yourself and what you experience. And what other kids are experiencing in this world. So you're constantly confronted with all of these things when you're parenting your own children. But I think it goes back with what you're just saying, Christy Rose, around this space of how are we taking care of ourselves? And, you know, we have this big buzzword right now, especially with social media, of self-care. But what does that really mean? And are we really doing it? Right? Like, if we know, as you said, if this repeated thing is happening again, then it's probably what is developmentally appropriate for children. But it is also extremely frustrating for adults,
right.
Because we are no longer needing that ourselves. And so that means that we have to pull from a well of patience and a well of understanding. And when and we all have done it, right? So you can say, when I am feeling rested and well cared for myself, and I'm engaging with my child and it's frustrating, I can come in with patience and keep my calm voice. When I am stressed, when I am burnt out, when I'm having a really challenging moment and I'm just trying to leave the house and you still don't have your shoes on, then I'm much more likely to snap or yell or become visibly frustrated. And so, you know, kind of just consistently reminding ourselves. And my favorite imagery with parents is to really think of parents as the trees and your babies as the fruit. And if the tree is not well taken care of, then that fruit won't be sweet and well developed, right? And so we are never harming our children by caring for ourselves. We are only benefiting our children when we do that. And we are only benefiting our ability to show up and be there. And that self-care then has to involve, it goes beyond the like, excuse me, like taking a bath or getting a massage. Those are necessary. Do that. But it also involves sometimes work, like going to therapy and moving your body so that you can discharge some of those feelings. I garden. I go out there and garden and put my hands in the soil. And when I do that, I can go out there as frustrated as you want to be, come back, and I'm like, all right.
I'm thinking you've got some earth in your chart as you're talking. I was like, she's so clear and grounded. I'm just like, that's not the Sagittarius. So there you go.
Oh gosh, I love all this.
We're only benefiting our children by taking care of ourselves.
By taking care of it. And I think, I mean, I've said this too, it's not just in actually doing it. And like you said, being able to gain that clarity in those moments, but then we're also modeling for them what that looks like. Right. And because my kids always want to be like, my Cruz has often said, I want to be with you every second of the day. And I'm like, oh God. and I'm like, 10. I love you. And I theoretically want to do that too. Right. But I also need like a break. Right. Or a big way that I've tried to reframe that for him. I remember when I was younger, my mom worked a lot. And she would say, I'm working to put a roof over your head and to feed you and all those things. And I remember when I first would have to leave the kids, and I would kind of say that. And I was like, wait, that just makes them feel like shit, right? Like, and so I said, you know what? I love what I do, and it makes me feel really good to do what I love. And so when I'm able to go and do the things that I love, then when I come back, I'm able to be a better mom, and I'm able to, feel happy in those moments. And then I said, and I love what I do, and I want you to one day love whatever it is that you are going to do, so to reframe those things in that way. And I feel like then that models that, like, oh, my mom is out there doing something that she loves, doing something, because they know what I do. So they're like, oh, she's bettering the world, right? Like there's this, but I do, Justin, maybe our last little time together, I do want to come back to gun violence. Not because I want to go deep into like policy and all that. But I was in one of my last, I was teaching a class on social justice this semester, and we were talking about intergenerational trauma, and we were looking at, like what is the trauma within our families, right? Like, and that's often what we talk about, but then there's collective trauma. Yes. Right. And I used an example of COVID, right? Because you were saying like we're all having mental health issues, right? Like it's not like, anyone is special that is experienced, like because we're all experiencing that collective trauma, right? So COVID was an example. And then I think gun violence is another example of that collective trauma, both for, I think, those real like survivors, but then also just us as bystanders to watching this happen over and over and over again.
Generational.
Having to be witness to that. And to the point where I really, anytime I hear about some mass shooting, I just don't even want to hear about it. Like because it would elicit too much emotion, right? It would almost make me not want to like function. So I'm always like,
how do we drive our children to school?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly. I mean, for years when they would talk about what is it called, like active shooter drills, I was like, oh, absolutely not. And now I'm like, wait, maybe, like, I don't know, like I'm starting to like doubt, like, is that necessary? But I do think, and this was something I mentioned in my classes years ago, I was like, yeah, they keep putting the blame on mental health, and we're not really looking at like, of course we're all having mental health because there's this collective trauma, but then I love that you named toxic masculinity, because I was like, if there is a real culprit for gun violence, it's that. Like they've done like research on a lot of the white men who did these mass shootings. They have a history of domestic violence, right? So there's these patterns there, right? And domestic violence is directly correlated to toxic masculinity. And so as you were talking about that, I was like, yeah, of course they don't want to talk about those things. Right? It's done purposefully that they don't want to talk about toxic masculinity, that they don't want to talk about white supremacy. It's actually much easier to, make it seem like, oh, somebody was just crazy. It was just a one-off. Somebody was crazy, versus let's really look at the societal issues, because then it would just have us unpacking and unraveling everything.
Everything, all the things. I mean, yes, absolutely. And I think, when I think about gun violence in particular, I feel like, as with a lot of trauma, we are experiencing so much gaslighting around the, like, if each experience was a disclosure and someone going, I don't believe you, like, that's kind of what is happening collectively, because it is very clear that, even from a policy end, that we have so many examples of what happens when assault rifles are not available. We have so many examples of many other countries who just do not experience this because they have stricter gun laws. It's at this point just very clear. The evidence is there, right? But we just keep refusing in this country to kind of acknowledge that. And that's because there's all these other systems of power, these colonial, capitalist, white supremacist, toxic masculinity systems that are functioning and asking to continue to thrive. And they're being very threatened right now in particular. And so it is kind of grasped to continue to hold on to them. And so as a people, we're just consistently being asked to pretend like there aren't solutions or there aren't this issue when there very much are. And it is systemic, and we have to go into it. And I think it even, when we start to talk about toxic masculinity, we're even going into all of the things that are happening around gender and the amount of transphobia that we're experiencing and the amount of difficulty so many people are having with just holding space for gender fluidity. And just even acknowledging that gender is a social construct. And if we are not able to have these conversations, we see this tie into these other ways, especially because of who is doing so many of these shootings. But it also goes back, if we come back to that idea, there's so many different ways we can like ping off in so many different pathways. But even if we come back to that idea of having a collective language to talk about mental health and to talk about feelings and to process feelings, the way that men are socialized is to not talk about feelings. And that anger is an acceptable feeling, and that violence is an acceptable behavior. And that is what has been consistently repeatedly throughout the generations promoted. And so we just consistently see that. We see it in the toys, we see it in the shows, we see it in our history, we see it in the war natures of our world, really. And so we have to be able to talk about that, and we have to be able to arm especially our boys with the language to talk about emotions, and to be able to see them as full people who are worthy and entitled to have all their emotions, to cry, to be tender, to be loving, to be caring, to be able to express anger, and to be responsible, right? And to not be caretaken in any way, or to be expected to be caretaken. And I'm staying in the binary right now by women, and that is what then girls are socialized to be. And this is what it has historically been. So we do not have language in our society to talk about this, and these are the consequences. The trauma, the anxiety, the depression that we are experiencing as a world are the responses and the reactions to what is occurring, and we are not addressing what is occurring repeatedly.
Well, that is a whole lecture.
I know. I'm like, we got to talk about the dominant narrative. We got to talk about how this is connected to purity culture and the stories in the Bible and people's misuse and continued perpetuation, how our society was founded. It's just it's so overwhelming to me. Oh my God. And it's so interesting how I was thinking too, it informs how I live my life, because I think at some point I will achieve a state of perfection, that's a Virgo to say. Oh my God. But I will be trauma informed, and I will be, I will be able to not judge myself and move into, and it's just that relational piece. And if the whole narrative can be dismantled in academia or in our spaces, but for our children, just being able to say your feelings, I believe you, you make sense. That's where it all comes down to, right? In our day-to-day life with our kids.
And I think especially, we talk a lot about, because we have sons, right? We have boys, and being the feminist that we are, right? Really being conscious about what type of, like you said, knowing that society is going to tell them not to show any emotion other than anger, and to express that anger via physical violence. And so the amount of work it requires us to say, to counter that, right? Because I've always said we can do all we want here at home, but they still have to go out and be, people of the world. And so they're going to encounter all these things. And so we're always how do we empower them to, when they encounter toxic masculinity, when they encounter the pressure to perform toxic masculinity, to give them, to empower them to know, like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So I really heard you, saying, like, to our boys especially, they need to cry. They need to feel that full range of emotions without judgment, and it's hard, it's hard because I judge myself. And I mean, we've talked about this a lot in terms of masculinity. So toxic masculinity isn't exclusive just to boys, right? Like, at least in my family, toxic masculinity was like a means of survival. So even women were going to perform toxic masculinity as a means of surviving in a patriarchal society. So I've internalized that, within myself, like, oh, I got to tough it out. I can't cry. I can't, I can't show emotion. So it's like, oh, I got to tap into my own emotions, and I have to try to help my kids tap into that. But I just want to say, I love how you're really drawing all those lines, right? Because there's our own trauma that we've experienced in our lineages, and then there's that collective trauma, and ultimately it's all affecting us. Right? It's that micro and that macro, and that, I always tell my students, I go, you have to, like, wake up and go out into the world, especially women, and, like, survive rape culture and also get everything you need to get done, right? Like, so there's the stress of, like, doing your daily shit and the stress of surviving rape culture. And that we have to validate that that's what we're dealing with here. So mental health is not just about, oh, we need to have less stress in our lives. It's like, then, like, how can we just, we can't avoid stress. But I love the drawing of, putting all those pieces together, right? That it's all part of this big web of nonsense. So that being said, we do want to wrap up here, and
we want people to find you. We want people to come to you.
How can they find you? How can they work with you? How can they, get some of your magic?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you both for enjoyed this conversation so much. And I just appreciate you having me on the podcast. Yes, you can find me a few places. If you're on social media, I have an account on Instagram. I'm at Mayana Geathers. I also have a website, mayanageathers.com. If you're interested in working with me as a therapist, or any of my fabulous colleagues who are also amazing feminist therapists at Bridges to Healing, you can find us at bridgestohealing.net as well. And if you're interested in my guided meditations, I am on all streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, as well as YouTube and Insight Timer.
Oh, I love it. Exciting. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for all your beautiful words of wisdom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayana. Intro and outro song is called Foreign Fog by The Corner House, a band that features our dear friend, Danelia Arechiga.